and welcome back to another episode of me denying that this is a photography channel while also making copious amounts of content on photography. Before we get into the collection, I wanted to make one thing very clear. Basically, every camera in it is a hand-me-down. Like, I paid for almost none of these cameras. The only camera that I actually paid for is the camera that I'm recording this video with. So if you start thinking about the prices that these cameras go for, just keep that in mind. I'm not rich. I'm just really fortunate to know people who also are aware that I have an interest in photography and are willing to give me cameras that they don't care about anymore. Without further ado, I guess we should just get started. There's a lot of cameras to get through, so let's go. Up first, we have the oldest camera in the collection. This is a camera that was made in like 1937, I think. I couldn't find an exact date for when this particular model was made because it had a sister camera that took a slightly different type of film. Speaking of the film, this camera takes 620 film, which is exactly the same as 120 film. The only difference is that 620 film is on a thinner and slightly longer spool. Now, the fact that modern day medium format film is exactly the same as what 620 used to be means you are able to use medium format film in these cameras. You just have to re-spool them onto a 620 spool. This is the box that the camera came in. It must be like 80 years old at this point. Here we have a nice little tag. To the owner of this camera, why not fasten this tag to your first roll of film when you take it for developing and printing? Pictures at night indoors, easy now with any camera. You can take indoor pictures at night with any camera. Any camera! Good stuff. The next two cameras I have are the Ansco Super Memar and the Rocca 35 Model 2M. The reason I'm lumping these two cameras together is because they're both rangefinders. They both shoot 35mm film. They're both barely functional. I'm pretty sure this one is actually broken. This one right here was owned by my great-grandfather, and then this one, the Rocca, was owned by my grandfather. That's how I have these. They're basically just display pieces at this point. They don't really work. I found a roll of film in this one, and I tried developing it myself. I had to rewind the film in the camera quite a bit, so there should have been shots on it, but there wasn't. And I'm fairly certain that's simply because this camera isn't functional anymore. That said, they are cool, really old cameras from the 50s, so I'm keeping them. Next camera is the one and only movie film camera that I own. This camera sounds beautiful. Like that's just an awesome sound. These cameras take standard 8 film, not Super 8, which comes in spools rather than the cartridges that Super 8 comes in. I actually received a roll of standard 8mm film for my birthday last year. Let me get it. Obviously it's film, so it's light sensitive, so I'm just gonna open it up and show you briefly. There's the spool. I obviously have yet to get this developed, but when I do, I'll be sure to share some of that footage here on YouTube in a video. I don't know what video that'll be. I also own the box for this camera. Kodak Automatic 8 movie camera. Here's the sides of it. I don't have the manual for this camera. The only pieces of paper inside the box are this one and this one, which appear to be advertisements. Designed expressly for your camera. Kodak Field Case. An ideal teammate for your camera. Brownie 310 movie projector. Might want to get me one of those so I can watch the movie that I shot over the past year. I'll be honest, this is just another 35mm film camera. It's a rangefinder, it's got a 40mm lens. It requires a battery that I have never seen in a camera before. It's a PX 625 battery. Like, what the hell even uses PX 625 batteries? This is actually a really quaint camera, so I would love to shoot with it at some point, but it requires a battery to shoot because that's how the shutter speed is controlled. You don't have control over shutter speed, you only have focus and aperture, so it needs a battery to work, which is why I don't use it, because I greatly prefer fully mechanical cameras. But one day, I will shoot with this. This is the Kodak Pocket Instamatic 10. It takes 110 film. It's the only camera I have that takes 110 film, which is why it's so tiny. 110 film is like this weird looking cartridge that you just like push in here, close that up. No controls on this whatsoever. You just push back on this tab back here to wind it, and then push the button on top to take a picture. And the photo negatives that this thing produces are really tiny. I don't know the size of them off my head, but like, I can't imagine you can get much detail out of photo negatives that small. Here's the box for it. It's very nice. The box has some flash bulbs inside of it. I've still got the manual for this camera. I don't own the box or the manual for a lot of these cameras, so a special little insight into the time that these cameras were meant for. This is the camera that revolutionized photography. When this camera was released, it was the first time in history that you could take a picture and pretty much immediately show it to someone or see the picture that you took. This did used to have just straight up leather on it. I reskinned it because I had to open up the bottom to do some repairs. And the way you open it, pull up on the viewfinder. There we go. The only shots that I've shot with this camera are long exposure nighttime shots. It's just a really nice feeling camera. And I mean, the design of it is just so iconic at this point. It's an interesting piece of history, and the camera still works pretty much perfectly fine. Alright, next up are my primary shooting cameras. We have the Pentax K1000 and the Pentax MX. Both of these cameras are phenomenal, and I kind of hover between the two. I usually use the K1000 for more casual pictures because this has a functional light meter. The MX does not, so I actually have to use a light meter app on my phone in order to get proper exposure. The main difference between the two is literally just the fact that the MX is way smaller than the K1000. It's difficult to show you just holding them like this, but you can at least see that the MX is shorter. Both of these cameras are still perfectly functional 35mm film cameras. All the shutter speeds work. The lenses I have for them work perfectly. It's all perfect. Like, I don't feel any need to ever get another 35mm film camera, unless it's like a Contax T2 or something. Because admittedly, my point and shoot game is not very strong. And if you're also new to film photography and you want to get a film camera, I can't recommend anything else other than a K1000. I mean, I'm sure there's better cameras. I'm sure a Leica M6 is better than a K1000. But if you have one of these cameras, you're set. You don't need to get anything else. This one is a hunking beast of a camera, the Colorburst 250. Film for this camera doesn't exist anymore. However, I did design a way to use Instax film in this camera. I actually bought the manual for this camera on eBay, and the reason I bought this manual is because I wanted to know more about the camera itself, but a PDF of this manual doesn't exist anywhere online. This information is apparently just too obscure. I'm gonna be completely honest about this next one. This camera's a piece of crap. I don't know where it came from. The only reason I have it is because my mom had it and she doesn't know where it came from. I've tried to find information on this camera online, and I could only find a Reddit post of somebody who is equally as confused as I am. It doesn't even seem to be a functional camera. Okay, there is a winder, but there's no point that it stops, and there's no point that you can pull the trigger to take a picture. This is never again going to take a picture in its life, so rip, I guess. This camera is just your basic Polaroid camera. I did a whole video shooting a pack of expired Polaroid film with this camera, so link up there if you want to watch that. Other than that, it's a cool camera. I like it. Like I said earlier, my point and shoot game is not strong, and the reason why is because this is the only point and shoot that I own. Although I suspect it's the only point and shoot I'm ever going to want to own. It also has a pretty comical zoom lens. Yeah. It's got a pretty good built-in flash. Blind you real quick. This actually has the ability to do a double exposure, which is actually a pretty neat function that almost no camera has the option to do. I've only run one roll of film through this camera to see if it was functional, and even then it was a roll of Panatomic X that expired in the 80s. So the pictures that came out weren't the best, but for checking if the camera's functional, they are the best. So thank you for your sacrifices, expired Kodak film. And with that, we're done. That's it. That's every camera in my collection. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.